F1 races are like buses, you wait 3 months for them and then 2 come along at once. As for the second round of the F1 season, the cars would take to the track at the Jeddah Corniche circuit, a venue that doesn't really fit in with its environment given the number of rights the track layout has. Coming into the weekend, it was Leclerc and Ferrari on top of the standings, having secured maximum points in Bahrain. No thanks to Red Bull, who after having both cars die just laps from the end, choked harder than the Falcons in Super Bowl 51. Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 2 in Saudi Arabia. Before we get going, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy and subscribe down below for more F1 content every week. With a variety of videos, I'm sure there's something you'll enjoy. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2022 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. So coming into the weekend, the Ferrari hype train had fully left the station, as for the first time since the British Grand Prix in 2018, the team led the championship. Luckily for them, Saudi Arabia has no rain and the Jeddah track has no gravel, so hopefully we shouldn't be seeing a repeat of the last time they were in front of the standings. Which also moves me nicely onto Sebastian Vettel, who after missing the Bahrain Grand Prix with COVID was still returning positive results come Thursday evening, meaning that the team had Nico Hülkenberg on standby, ready to spend another weekend driving around the back of the pack. Meanwhile, up at the sharp end, people were wondering if the fast nature of the Jeddah track would suit the Red Bull and potentially give them an edge over Ferrari during the course of the weekend. In other news, in the time between trips to Saudi Arabia, a number of changes have been made to the circuit. Surprisingly, none of them were to turn straights into wiggling pieces of track just to add more corners, because oh wait, they did that last year. However, the changes they have made include moving the barriers back at various points in a general effort to improve visibility, as the blind corners led to a number of close calls in practice last year. Other changes included the smoothing of some barriers, which should allow cars to potentially brush against them, along with the widening of the exit of the final corner. Can't possibly imagine who might have complained about that barrier being there. In FP1, it was the final turn causing early issues with a number of drivers locking up and going deep, but it was bigger issues for Haas and Kevin Magnussen, with the hydraulics failing straight away, the car seemingly deciding nothing had gone wrong for the team for far too long, thus leaving the Dane to limp back into the pits and miss the rest of the session. Fast forward about 15 minutes and it was the track causing problems, deciding that if the drivers weren't going to hit the walls would hit them, as the 50-metre board fell onto the track at turn 1 and was sent to polystyrene heaven, having been obliterated by Lando Norris. After the subsequent red flag, cars were back on track and it was Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes drawing some attention, as despite any setup changes the team had made between race weekends, their car was still bobbing up and down more than a yo-yo on steroids. By the end of the session, it seemed the new cars were very well suited to the Jeddah track, as the fastest time set by Charles Leclerc was only a second off last year's FP1 leading time, compared to nearly 3 seconds at Bahrain. Behind Leclerc's Ferrari, it was Verstappen in P2 and Bottas P3, though if Valtteri's years in a Mercedes taught us anything, it was that good times in practice mean absolutely nothing when it comes to your race pace. The start of FP2 was delayed by 15 minutes, and while on face value that's not an issue, the reason behind the delay was, well, at least to everyone except Formula 1. As between sessions, the story was developing for why there'd been large amounts of thick smoke seen very close to the circuit, with the answer being an explosion at a nearby Aramco oil depot caused by a missile strike, as if there weren't already enough reasons why F1 shouldn't be racing in Jeddah, and more on that in just a minute. With F1 being F1, they carried on as if nothing really happened, and once the session was underway, it was Kevin Magnussen again having car troubles. This time his Haas ground to a halt on track and forced him to retire from the session. At least he got halfway through this time. Over at Ferrari, it was going well until both drivers touched the wall within 5 minutes of each other, and while Sainz got away with his mistake, Leclerc wasn't so lucky, as contact with the inside of turn 4 broke a steering arm. This forced him to miss the rest of the session and added another chapter to the love story that is Charles Leclerc and street circuit barriers. Finishing the session with car issues was Yuki Tsunoda, as he rounded out the Red Bull powertrain's car failure quadruple, his car stopping on track with just a few minutes remaining. It was at this point where things really started to get complicated, as team bosses met with Stefano Domenicali along with FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem to discuss the safety of the event given the previously mentioned nearby missile strikes, and after some time emerged to announce that the racing would go ahead along with unanimous support from the teams, with the FIA President stating how it was infrastructure being targeted, kind of like saying, "Don't worry lads, they're firing missiles over us, not at us." And for just a moment we thought that would be that, but it wasn't. As the drivers then held their own meeting, lasting a number of hours, with F1 bosses and then team principals coming back to the paddock to be involved with the discussion. And while it was going on behind closed doors, they were at least transparent, showing us that Yuki was up way past his bedtime. But with the meetings going on, we waited, and still waited, until almost 3 AM local time when the drivers dispersed, the ultimate decision being that the race would go ahead. On the Saturday morning, the FIA and Formula 1 released a joint statement on the matters of the day before, which to me at least came across as the stakeholders want their race. Moving to the track, and it was a pretty quiet start to the session, meaning we had to sit through the commentary team trying to work out the different ways you can warm up a squash ball. When things did get going, it was once again a Red Bull powered car stopping on track, well, the pit exit, but that still counts. The drive had given up in Pierre Gasly's AlphaTauri almost immediately after leaving his pit box, and instead of pulling over straight away, he decided to park it after the white line at the pit exit, meaning his team weren't allowed to come and get the car, so he was forced to participate in F1's equivalent of the World's Strongest Man competition. Later in the session, there were a couple of incidents to note. First off, Latifi in the Williams hit the wall at the exit of turn 2, but was lucky enough not to damage his car. Then on a fast lap, Max Verstappen decided to test his car's rallying abilities as he went curb jumping at the start of the final sector. And given that was his push lap, he didn't improve, and so going into qualifying, it was Leclerc, followed by Verstappen in P2, and then Sergio Perez. To start Q1, it was everyone except Mercedes out on soft tyres, with the Red Bulls and Ferraris electing to do 2 warm-up laps before pushing, which meant they weren't able to set lap times as Nicholas Latifi brought out an early red flag. This was after he lost control entering the banked turn 13 hairpin, with his car ending up in a very strange position, right next to the gap in the barriers. When the session got back underway, the attention was on the Mercedes team and Lewis Hamilton, not because he was challenging the Red Bulls in front, but because he was on the verge of being knocked out in Q1. But this is a 7-time world champ we're talking about, surely he'd find a way to get through. Yeah, nah. He was knocked out by Lance Stroll, a driver known for being poor in qualifying, talk about a low point. And then joining Hamilton and Latifi out in Q1, wow, that's not a sentence I thought I'd be saying, was Albon in the other Williams, Nico Hülkenberg and Yuki Tsunoda, who couldn't set a time due to cooling issues. Into Q2, and Daniel Ricciardo was getting into trouble, playing the game of who could go slowly on the racing line, subsequently blocking Ocon and getting a 3-place grid penalty for it. A little later on, with 5 minutes left in the session, we were given another reminder of how stupidly dangerous racing at Jeddah is, as Mick Schumacher had a massive crash coming through turn 12. First things first, Mick is okay, but was taken to hospital for precautionary measures and wouldn't take part in the race. However, the fact that roughly every other incident at this track ends up being a big one is just ridiculous, and what makes it even more annoying is that the circuit was purpose-built for Formula 1 and they could have done literally anything with it, yet somehow the powers that be managed to come up with something that is literally the textbook definition of how to make racing dangerous: speed and walls. And while there are so many reasons for why this weekend just shouldn't be a thing, ultimately money talks and the show goes on, with both McLarens out in Q2 with Joe, Schumacher and Lance Stroll. Into Q3, and after the first runs, Carlos Sainz led a Ferrari 1-2 with Perez in 3rd and Verstappen down in 6th. Then for the final laps, it was the Ferraris that crossed the line first, with Leclerc improving to take provisional pole away from his teammate, and with Verstappen down in the first sector, it looked like all hope was lost for Red Bull. Then up stepped Sergio Perez, who improved his time to leapfrog both Ferraris and collect the first pole position of his career, while his teammate could only manage 4th. And while I'm happy for Checo, quick bit of advice here, don't go doing it too often or a certain someone might be having words. Before lights out, it was Ferrari giving their fans heart attacks, with an electrical issue on Sainz's car being fixed about 40 minutes before the start. But once resolved, the 19 drivers were good to go. So 18 drivers were good to go, as Yuki was out of it before the race even started, with yet another issue for the AlphaTauri team. Finally getting to the start, and it was surprisingly incident-free, with Max Verstappen doing well, getting past Sainz in the opening corners. It was then over to the Alpines to provide the action, who battled against each other for a number of laps, and when asked by the commentary team, Otmar Szafnauer said they were letting them race, which turned out to be about as truthful as Russian news outlets, with Ocon told to hold position about 2 minutes later. Fast forward a few laps and it was time for pit stops, with Ferrari baiting Red Bull into pitting Perez from the lead, looking to maintain track position by stopping Leclerc pulling the undercut, which would be fine so long as nobody crashed. But Latifi being Latifi meant someone did crash, as apparently binning the car in qualifying didn't satisfy his pay driver needs. This brought out the safety car and allowed both Ferraris along with Verstappen to jump Perez, meaning through no fault of his own, Checo was out to 4th. Well, 3rd on the track, but actually 4th because safety car line rules and stuff. At the restart, pretty much everyone held position, with the drivers keeping it clean and not causing any problems. The same couldn't be said for the Alfa Romeo pit crew, who, despite being in the sport since 1993, forgot that jacking up the car counts as working on it, something not allowed while serving time penalties, meaning Joe's additional 5 seconds for leaving the track and gaining an advantage earlier in the race became an extra drive-through. Then, after 15 laps of nothing happening, everything happened, as in F1's version of Game of Thrones, cars were dying left, right and centre, with Alonso, Ricciardo and Bottas all out of the race in the space of about 2 laps, and while the Finn could make it to the pits, Ricciardo and Alonso could only manage the equivalent of putting your plate next to the dishwasher and not in it. With all that being cleared under a VSC, the battle at the front was back on, and for the 4th time in 2 races, Verstappen went down the inside, only to then be overtaken straight away, which led to the game now seemingly played every year at Saudi Arabia, DRS chicken, as the next time round neither driver wanted to be ahead, with both of them locking up to ensure they weren't in the lead of the race. You know you've designed your track well when that happens. Then on the next lap, it seemed after 7 full years of pure aggression, the Dutchman had learned something, this time biding his time into turn 27 so that he could make the pass into turn 1. It was at this point that Alex Albon and Lance Stroll decided they weren't getting enough coverage as the two came together into turn 1, the stewards deciding it was Albon that had yeeted his car up the inside and gave him a 3-place grid drop for Australia. Back to the front, and despite Leclerc closing the gap to half a second at the line, it was Verstappen who came away on top, showing just what his Red Bull can do when they actually finish. Anyway, that wraps up this video. Do give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoyed, and leave any thoughts or feedback in the comments. But until next time, take care.